It's 10 p.m. at Douala's International Airport in Cameroon. This Kenya Airways Boeing 737 is carrying out a multi-leg journey and has flown in from the Ivory Coast earlier in the evening. It will now fly as KQ507 on its final leg from Cameroon to Kenya. What makes this flight slightly unusual today is that there are thunderstorms in this region and the visibility is poor. This makes the conditions riskier than usual and severely unfavorable for flying. On board the flight are 108 passengers and 8 crew members. The aircraft's pilot crew today is a mix, with the captain having significant experience. Captain Francis has over 8,000 hours of flying and is 52 years of age. Captain Francis is also flying with his co-pilot, First Officer Andrew. First Officer Andrew is 23 years of age with just over 800 hours of flying. The flight is scheduled to depart at 11 p.m. However, the increasing rainfall and reduced visibility has led to Captain Francis cancelling the departure. Around 54 minutes later, he requests the air traffic control for a delayed departure. He is granted the permission and KQ507 is ready to go. 4 minutes later, the aircraft's engines are switched on, flaps are set to 5 degrees, flight controls are checked, and the weather radar is also switched on. Shortly past midnight, KQ507 gets cleared to taxi to runway 12. The air traffic controller requests the pilots to call back when they are lined up and ready to take off. Whilst taxiing to the runway, the captain has noticed on his weather radar that the weather ahead right after takeoff is deteriorating due to increasing rainfall and further reduced visibility. He requests the air traffic controller for clearance in modifying his route shortly after takeoff. The weather radar on the Boeing 737 shows the weather pattern ahead through a color map. For instance, in this image, the green displays no or light rain, yellow shows moderate, red indicates heavy rainfall, and magenta shows thunderstorms. The air traffic controller gets back, confirming that KQ507 is clear to maintain a heading slightly right to the runway after takeoff. At around the same time, another aircraft which is flying back to Morocco, RAM287, decides to cancel its departure due to worries of poor weather. Kenya Airways, however, has decided to continue. 5 minutes past midnight, KQ507 lines up on runway 12 and is about to begin its takeoff. One key detail to note is that this aircraft has a tendency to turn right after takeoff when the controls are left unattended. This is due to asymmetries in its structure that occurred during its manufacturing. This is an important point to keep in mind, as this requires that minor corrections are regularly made by the pilot to keep the aircraft level when manually flying it. At 6 minutes past midnight, the takeoff roll begins and the aircraft takes off. The landing gear is also retracted. Going back to the tendency of the aircraft to roll to the right, the pilot is now correcting this by turning the aircraft controls to the left. Captain Francis does this corrective action for the first 1,000 feet that the aircraft gains in altitude. After the first 1,000 feet, the captain stops controlling the aircraft. This is likely due to them monitoring the weather radar to ensure that they do not enter a thunderstorm ahead. Also, for some reason, it seems that the pilots have assumed that they have engaged the autopilot. However, at this stage, the autopilot has not been engaged. Now that the aircraft is flying without any manual input from the pilot nor the autopilot, the aircraft starts to roll to the right, slowly. Whilst this is happening, the bank angle of the aircraft is increasing. The bank angle is the angle at which the aircraft is turning. However, because the change in this bank angle is slow, the pilots have not realized this. This is a case of spatial disorientation. This can happen often when flying in night or cloudy conditions. It tends to happen when visual cues, such as the horizon, are not visible, usually in bad weather or at night. Pilots are trained to rely on their instruments. However, in this case, due to the poor weather, it's likely that the pilot's focus was on their weather radar for too long. About 20 seconds later, the bank angle of the aircraft has increased to beyond 30 degrees. In the Boeing 737, when the bank angle exceeds 30 degrees, a bank angle warning alarm usually goes off.
Bank angle, bank angle, bank angle.
When the pilots hear this warning, they are likely startled as they realize that they have been in a prolonged right turn for nearly half a minute and that their autopilot was also not engaged. Captain Francis then tries to correct the aircraft's bank angle immediately, and he initially turns his control wheel to the right, which worsens the situation. He then sharply turns it back to the left upon realizing his mistake. However, the initial input of right has already worsened the bank angle situation, and the aircraft has now reached a bank angle of 50 degrees. With the worsening situation, the captain then states, "OK, command," and presses the autopilot switch, Command A. However, the autopilot is still not effectively engaged. It's worth noting that this switch, CMDA, had suffered recurrent breakdowns for a period of 3 months before this flight. 5 seconds later, as the autopilot is not engaged, the aircraft's bank angle worsens to 55 degrees. And at this point, the captain says, "We are crashing." Likely in panic, the pilot also makes several bursts of rudder inputs to the right. This causes the bank angle to now reach 70 degrees. The rudder inputs to the right are worsening the situation, as this is pushing the nose of the aircraft further down. This, coupled with a high bank angle, have put the aircraft in an almost unrecoverable situation. The pilots have now begun to correct this bank angle, and the aircraft is slowly turning back to the left. However, there is not enough altitude left to recover from this position. Only 11 seconds after this, the aircraft drops from 2,900 feet all the way to the ground, crashing with a speed of 287 knots or 530 kilometers per hour. Unfortunately, the impact of this crash leaves no survivors.